On your knees, Senator. Gunner's voice was a low growl laced with pure venom. Jake, his body already trembling from the freezing Pacific surf, didn't move. His knuckles were white where he gripped the wooden bench. I said get on your goddamn knees. Gunner kicked the bench out from under him. Jake hit the floor with a grunt, the impact rattling his teeth. The other trainees in the barracks, ghosts in the dim light, just watched. No one dared to intervene. This was Gunner's show. You think because your daddy pushes paper in Washington, you get to be one of us. Gunner looped the heavy chain around Jake's neck, the cold iron biting into his skin. You think you can buy a trident? No, that's not why I'm here. Jake's voice was a ragged whisper. Then show me why you're here. Gunner roared, his face inches from Jake's. Show me what a privileged little boy does when the world gets hard. They crawl. Now you're going to be the anchor this team thinks you are. You're going to drag it all the way to the surf and back. Like the dead weight you are. Gunner yanked the chain. Jake stumbled forward, forced onto his hands and knees. The rough concrete tore at his palms and the knees of his uniform. Crawl, Gunner bellowed, the sound echoing in the cavernous barracks. Let's hear you bark for your daddy, Senator. Woof woof. Tears of rage and humiliation burned Jake's eyes. He was drag-scraped across the floor like an animal. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, some filled with pity, most with fear. This was Bud A.'s basic underwater demolition, SEAL training. It was designed to break men. And Gunner Harding, he was making it his personal mission to shatter Jake Riley into a million pieces. The clanking of the chain was the only sound of funeral dirge for his dignity. Out the door he was dragged, into the cold Coronado night, toward the crashing waves that sounded like mocking laughter. This wasn't training anymore. This was something else entirely. This was torture. It had all started 6 weeks ago on day 1. The air in Coronado, California, was thick with salt and testosterone. 95 aspiring warriors stood at attention on the grinder, a legendary slab of asphalt where dreams came to die. The instructors, men carved from oak and steel, circled them like sharks. Look around you, bellowed Chief Petty Officer Slade, his voice like gravel grinding together. Most of you will not be here in 6 months. Most of you will quit. You will ring that bell. He pointed to a brass bell mounted on a wooden frame, and you will go home to your mommies. We are here to find the 1%, the unbreakable. Later, during introductions, the seed of Jake's personal hell was planted. Each man stated his name and hometown. Harding, Gunner. Odessa, Texas. My father was a Master Chief. My grandfather was a UDT frogman in Vietnam. Pride radiated from him. He was legacy. Then it was Jake's turn. Riley, Jake, Arlington, Virginia. Slade's eyes narrowed. Riley, any relation to Senator Marcus Riley? Jake hesitated for a fraction of a second. He's my father, Chief. A murmur rippled through the formation. A United States Senator's son here in the meat grinder. It was unheard of. Gunner's gaze fixed on Jake, and in that moment, a silent declaration of war was made. To Gunner, Jake wasn't a fellow candidate. He was an imposter. A tourist in their sacred world of pain and sacrifice. A senator's kid, Hung Gunner sneered later in the chow hall. Did Daddy make a call to get you a spot, trying to build up that political resume before you run for office? I'm here for the same reason you are, Harding, Jake said evenly, trying to diffuse the tension. Don't you dare compare yourself to me, Gunner hissed, jabbing a thick finger into Jake's chest. My family bled for the trident. Yours writes checks and gives speeches. You're playing dress up. This is a costume to you. The harassment was relentless and insidious. During long ocean swims, Gunner would subtly pull on Jake's fin, trying to make him fall behind the pack. During log PT, where teams of 6 men had to carry a 200-pound waterlogged telephone pole for miles, Gunner would intentionally shift his weight onto Jake, hoping to crush him. Feeling that, Senator, that's the weight of real work. Something you wouldn't know anything about. But Jake endured. He was physically gifted, a former collegiate swimmer. He kept his head down, pushed through the pain, and never complained. He wanted to earn his place more than anything, precisely because of who his father was. He needed to prove, mostly to himself, that he was more than just a name. His only ally was a wiry, fast-talking kid from El Paso named Leo Martinez. They called him Patch because he was always getting scraped up, but he had a spirit that wouldn't quit. "Don't let that son of a bitch get to you," Patch would say after a grueling evolution. "He's just pissed off because you're still here. You're messing with his worldview." But Gunner's campaign was escalating. It wasn't just physical anymore. He started turning other trainees against Jake, planting seeds of doubt. "You see him," Gunner would say to a group. "He gets tired. He'll just call Daddy. We fail. We go home broke. He fails. He goes home to a mansion. He's not one of us." The poison worked. A subtle isolation began to form around Jake. Men who were friendly one day were distant the next. They were all running on fumes, physically and emotionally, and Gunner gave them an easy target for their own fear and frustration. Jake felt like he was on an island, surrounded by a hostile sea. He would lie in his bunk at night, his muscles screaming, and listen to the distant sound of the waves. He'd come here to find a brotherhood, but instead, he'd found a tormentor. And the worst part was, he knew it was only the beginning. Gunner's hatred was a fire that needed more fuel, and Jake could feel the flames getting closer every single day. The sun had not yet risen over the Pacific, but Hell Week was in full swing. For 5.5 days, the trainees were subjected to constant physical exertion, cold, and sleep deprivation. It was the crucible designed to separate the men from the boys. And it was Gunner's perfect playground. The evolution was Log PT, Jake's boat crew, with Gunner as the boat crew leader, hoisted the massive, water-soaked log onto their shoulders. It felt like a small car. They'd been running with it for what felt like hours, up and down the soft sand dunes. Up, down, Chief Slade screamed, his voice raw. "You are slow, you are weak." Jake's vision was tunneling. His body, starved of sleep and proper food for 3 days, was screaming in protest. A violent shiver racked his frame, a symptom of borderline hypothermia from spending countless hours in the frigid 58-degree water. "Keep moving, Riley," Patch grunted from behind him, trying to take some of the weight. But Gunner, at the front, noticed Jake's faltering steps. A cruel smile touched his lips. "Looks like the senator is fading," he yelled over the crashing surf. "Can't handle a little cold water. Thought you were a big-time swimmer." With a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, Gunner drove the log backward, putting an impossible amount of pressure directly onto Jake. Jake's knees buckled. He tried to cry out, but only a choked gasp escaped his lips. And then blackness. Jake collapsed, the log crashing down onto the sand beside him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. Man down! Man down!" Patch screamed, dropping his end of the log and scrambling to Jake's side. "Get a corpsman." Petty Officer Evans, a young instructor with sharp, intelligent eyes, was there in an instant. He checked Jake's pulse, his breathing. Jake's skin was cold and clammy, his lips tinged with blue. "He's hypothermic and exhausted, Chief," Evans reported to Slade, his voice tight with concern. "We need to get him to the medical bay, now." Chief Slade strolled over, his expression one of pure disgust. He kicked Jake's boot lightly. "Get up, Riley." Jake didn't stir. "I said get up," Slade roared. "Chief, he's out cold," Evans insisted. "This isn't faking. Look at him. This is a serious medical situation." Slade stared down at Jake's pale face for a long moment. Then he looked up at the other trainees, who were watching, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. He couldn't show weakness. He couldn't let one candidate, especially the senator's son, disrupt the calculated brutality of Hell Week. "Fine," Slade spat. "Drag him over to the dunes. Cover him with a blanket. Give him some water when he wakes up. It's a little weakness leaving the body, that's all." Evans was stunned. "Chief, with all due respect, protocol requires an immediate medical evaluation for any loss of consciousness. This could be serious if we don't report this." "Are you questioning my order, Petty Officer Evans?" Slade's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Listen to me carefully. We report this, it becomes a mountain of paperwork. It becomes an investigation into our training methods. A senator's kid gets a chill, and the whole damn program gets scrutinized by a bunch of desk jockeys in D.C. who've never felt a moment of discomfort in their lives." He leaned in closer. "So here's what happened. Trainee Riley got tired. He sat out an evolution to rest. That's it. There was no collapse. There was no loss of consciousness. It's a non-event. Are we clear? Evans's jaw was tight. He knew this was wrong. He knew it was a dangerous, reckless lie, but he was a petty officer, and Slade was a chief. A direct order was a direct order. Crystal, Chief, Evans said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Jake woke up an hour later, shivering under a thin wool blanket on the cold sand. Patch was beside him, holding a canteen. Hey, man, you with us? Jake's head throbbed. What happened? You passed out. Hard, Patch said, his voice low. Chief Slade just had us drag you over here, said you were faking it. Faking it, Jake whispered, the injustice of it a fresh wave of pain. I couldn't feel my legs. I know, man, I know. Jake had blacked out, a clear, undeniable medical emergency. And the command structure had not only failed to help him, they had actively covered it up. They had labeled him a coward and a malingerer to avoid paperwork. For the first time, a sliver of genuine fear entered Jake's heart. It wasn't the fear of the training, of the cold, or of the pain. It was the fear of being utterly alone, trapped in a system that would rather see him break than bend its own rules. The instructors weren't just testing him. Some of them were actively working against him. And Gunner was watching from across the beach, a look of triumph on his face. He hadn't just won the battle, he had gotten the system to validate his persecution. Jake was no longer just the senator's son. He was now officially a weak link, a quitter. And in the world of the SEALs, there was no worse crime. The cover-up of Jake's collapse emboldened and Gunner. He saw that Chief Slade was on his side, that the rules didn't apply equally. The harassment escalated from brutal training tactics to outright psychological warfare. Patch watched, his anger simmering. He knew what he'd seen. He knew Jake was one of the strongest candidates in the class, but no one could withstand a targeted campaign of abuse from both a fellow trainee and a corrupt instructor. We have to do something, Patch whispered to Jake one night in the barracks. This isn't right, we can report Slade. To who? Jake countered, his voice flat with exhaustion. He is the authority here, it's his word against ours. And right now, my word isn't worth a damn thing. Patch knew he was right, but he couldn't let it go. He had a small, waterproof action camera he'd brought with him, against the rules, to capture some memories of Coronado before training started. An idea, a dangerous one, began to form in his mind. A few days later, the evolution was surf torture. The trainees had to link arms and lie down in the pounding, bone-chilling surf until their bodies went numb. It was a test of willpower and team cohesion. As the waves crashed over them, Gunner, who was linked to Jake's right, began his assault. You feel that, Senator, he snarled, his voice barely audible over the roar of the ocean. That's the Pacific trying to wash the stink of politics off you. But it won't work, you don't belong here. Under the cover of the churning water, Gunner began to violently shove Jake's head under the waves, holding him down for a few seconds at a time. It was a mock drowning, disguised as the natural chaos of the surf. Breathe it in, taste the salt, this is our world, not yours. Jake sputtered and coughed, his lungs burning. He tried to break free, but the linked arms of the men on either side held him fast. He was trapped. But 50 feet away, half hidden behind a concrete pylon of the pier, Patch was faking a violent leg cramp. He had groaned and writhed until an instructor told him to get out of the water and walk it off. And as he limped away, his small camera, clutched in his hand, was rolling. He captured it all. Gunner's sneering face, the deliberate way he forced Jake's head underwater, Jake's desperate struggles. It was undeniable proof. That night, heart pounding, Patch used a contraband smartphone to upload the footage to a private online forum for active and former special operations personnel. He posted it anonymously. The title was simple. This is happening at Budness. Is this what honor, courage, and commitment looks like? The effect was instantaneous. Within hours, the video had spread like wildfire through the community. The comments section exploded with outrage from hardened veterans and active duty SEALs. It was one thing to be tough, it was another to be a malicious bully who endangered a teammate. The next morning, a palpable tension hung over the base. The instructors were tight-lipped and furious. An unofficial investigation began immediately, but it wasn't to find the truth, it was to find the leak. Gunner knew. He didn't know how, but he knew Jake and Patch were responsible. His rage was incandescent. This was more than just a training rivalry now. They had broken the code. They had taken an internal problem and aired it out to the world. He and two of his cronies cornered Jake and Patch that afternoon in the boathouse, a large shed where the inflatable combat rafts were stored. It was isolated, far from the main barracks. "You think you're clever?" Gunnar snarled, slamming the door shut. The room was cast into shadow. "You think you can hide behind a keyboard?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Patch said, his voice trembling slightly. "Don't lie to me," Gunnar roared, grabbing Patch and slamming him against a stack of life vests. "You recorded it, and he turned to Jake. You put him up to it, crying to the world because training is too hard." "That wasn't training, Gunnar. You were trying to drown me," Jake said, stepping forward. That was all Gunnar needed. The first punch caught Jake in the gut, doubling him over. The other two men grabbed Patch, holding him so he had to watch. They were methodical, vicious. They focused their blows on the ribs, the stomach, the back, places where bruises wouldn't be easily seen. It was a brutal, one-sided beating. Jake fought back, but it was 3 against 1. He was quickly overwhelmed. As he lay on the floor, tasting blood, the door to the boathouse creaked open. Chief Slade stood there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He took in the scene of Jake on the floor, Gunnar standing over him, knuckles bloody. A flicker of something surprise, annoyance, crossed his face. Slade Chief Jake gasped, thinking, hoping, that help had arrived. Slade looked at Gunnar. He looked at Jake. Then, without a word, he slowly pulled the door shut, plunging the room back into darkness. The click of the latch was the loudest sound Jake had ever heard. It was the sound of abandonment. The sound of the system not just failing, but actively colluding with his tormentors. Gunnar laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You see, nobody cares. Out here, we solve our own problems." He delivered one last, vicious kick to Jake's ribs. "Next time you snitch, we'll finish the job the Pacific started." Lying in a heap on the cold concrete, every breath a fresh stab of pain, Jake finally understood. There was no one to appeal to. There was no higher authority to call. In this world, might made right, and Chief Slade had just sanctioned their brand of justice. Patch's desperate attempt to save him had only made things infinitely worse. It had painted a massive target on both their backs and dragged them into an even deeper circle of hell. The week after the beating in the boathouse was a blur of misery. Jake's ribs were a tapestry of purple and black bruises, making every breath, every movement, an exercise in agony. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of despair. Chief Slade had seen, and he had walked away. The message was clear: you are on your own. Gunnar's torment became a constant, suffocating presence. He no longer needed to hide his actions. He was untouchable. He would accidentally knock Jake's food tray to the floor in the chow hall. He would assign Jake the heaviest, most broken equipment. He would whisper threats in the dark of the barracks. "Keep your mouth shut, Senator, or next time, Patch gets it worse." That threat paralyzed Jake. He could endure his own suffering, but he couldn't bear the thought of his friend being punished for his loyalty. He became quiet, withdrawn. The fire in his eyes began to dim. The most painful blow, however, came from the one person he thought he could count on. Patch was terrified. He was tough, but he wasn't stupid. He saw the cold fury in Gunnar's eyes and the implicit approval in Slade's. He felt the other trainees pulling away from them both, treating them like a disease. One evening, as Jake was trying to tape his own aching ribs, Patch sat on the bunk opposite him. "Jake," he started, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe this isn't worth it." Jake stopped, the roll of tape in his hand. "What are you talking about, Patch?" All of this, Patch gestured around the grim barracks. "Look, man, I know you want to prove something, I get it, but this isn't a fair fight. They're trying to kill you, and the instructors are letting them." He took a deep breath. "Your dad, he's Senator Riley. One phone call, man, that's all it would take. One call and you're out of here, and these bastards get what's coming to them." Jake stared at him, a profound sense of betrayal washing over him. It was the same argument Gunnar had been making since day one. The one accusation he had fought so hard to disprove. And now it was coming from his only friend. "So you think I should quit?" Jake's voice was dangerously quiet. "You think I should use my father's name to run away? I think you should use it to survive." Patch shot back, his fear making him angry. "What's the point of having that power if you let yourself get beaten to death in some shed? What does that prove? It's not just you, Jake. They're coming after me too. You dragged me into this. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. You dragged me into this. He was poison. His presence here was hurting the only person who had tried to help him. I'm sorry, man, Patch said, his anger deflating, replaced by a weary sadness. I don't know how much more of this I can take. He walked away, leaving Jake sitting in the silence. And in that silence, Jake Riley finally broke. He was truly, utterly alone. His body was battered. His instructors were complicit in his torture. And his only friend now saw him as a liability, a privileged fool on a suicide mission. Later that night, unable to sleep, Jake walked out to the deserted boathouse. The moon cast long shadows on the water. He sat on the dock, the cold seeping into his bones. He thought about the bell. The shiny brass bell that signified defeat. All he had to do was ring it 3 times, and this would all be over. He could go home. He pulled out his dive knife, a standard issue crowbar. He ran his thumb over the razor-sharp edge. He looked at his reflection in the polished steel. He didn't recognize the gaunt, haunted face staring back at him. Sunken eyes, a busted lip, a soul-deep weariness etched into every feature. Gunnar was right. He didn't belong here. He had brought nothing but trouble. With a choked sob, he pressed the tip of the knife against his forearm. A thin line of red welled up. The sharp, clean pain was a strange relief. It was a pain he could control. Unlike the chaos that had consumed his life, it was a focal point in a world of hurt. He wasn't trying to end his life. He was just trying to feel something, anything other than the crushing despair. The next morning, an instructor saw the bandage on his arm. He was sent to the medical bay, where the cut was examined. The report went straight to Chief Slade. Slade read the report, his lips curling into a sneer of contempt. He saw it not as a cry for help, but as a final, pathetic gambit. Attention-seeking behavior, he wrote in his official log. Trainee Riley is exhibiting signs of emotional instability and is not suited for the pressures of naval special warfare, recommending he be dropped from the course for failure to adapt. It was the perfect excuse. The senator's son hadn't been hazed or bullied out of the program. No, he was simply mentally weak. A spoiled brat who couldn't handle the heat and resorted to self-pity and manipulation. The system had found its neat and tidy narrative to cover all its sins. Jake was to be officially labeled a failure, and the truth of what had happened in the dark corners of Buddy S would be buried with his career. The air on the grinder the next morning was cold and still, thick with unspoken dread. The news had spread through the barracks. Riley was being processed out. He was a washout. Gunnar wore a smirk of absolute victory. He hadn't just broken Jake, he had erased him. Jake stood in a loose formation with the other trainees, waiting for the day's brutality to begin. He was a dead man walking, just waiting for the official paperwork. He felt hollow, numb. Then came the sound. A low, rhythmic thumping from the west, over the Pacific. It grew steadily louder, a deep, percussive beat that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. What the hell is that? Someone muttered. Every head turned toward the sky. To sleek, black MH-60S Seahawk helicopters were flying in low and fast, hugging the coastline. They weren't passing by. They were coming for them. The lead helicopter flared out over the grinder, its powerful rotor wash kicking up a storm of sand and debris. Trainees shielded their eyes, their uniforms whipping in the man-made gale. This was not a normal occurrence. This was a display of power. The helicopter touched down with practiced ease, its engines whining. The side door slid open. Chief Slade and the other instructors ran toward the aircraft, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Out stepped 2 men in crisp navy dress whites, their sleeves adorned with the gold stripes of captains. They were followed by a team of stern-faced men in civilian clothes, who radiated an unmistakable aura of federal law enforcement, NCIS. But it was the last man to deplane who brought the entire base to a standstill. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver haircut in a severe military style. The stars on his collar and the gold aiguillettes on his shoulder were impossible to miss. He was a vice admiral. He moved with an economy of motion and an intensity that seemed to suck the very air out of the atmosphere. Chief Slade snapped to attention, his face ashen. "Admiral, sir, this is an unexpected honor. We had no word." The admiral's steel gray eyes swept over Slade, dismissing him as if he were a piece of furniture. His gaze scanned the formation of trainees until it landed on Jake. For a single, fleeting second, their eyes met. There was no warmth, no recognition. Only an arctic coldness that chilled Jake to the core. The Admiral turned to one of the captains. "Captain, seal the base. No one enters or leaves. No communications in or out. Confiscate all personal electronics. This is now an active crime scene under my command." Admiral," the captain replied, already speaking into his radio. The Admiral strode to the center of the grinder, the NCIS agents flanking him. He took a portable microphone from an aide. His voice, amplified, boomed across the compound. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. "My name is Vice Admiral Marcus Riley. I am the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command." A collective gasp went through the trainees. Gunner's jaw went slack, his face draining of all color. "Riley. Vice Admiral Marcus Riley." Jake felt his legs threaten to give out. His father. He had told everyone his father was a senator. It was a lie, a cover story they had agreed upon. He hadn't wanted the pressure, the attention, that came with being the son of the most powerful SEAL in the world. He had wanted to be just another candidate. "It has come to my attention," the Admiral continued, his voice like cracking ice, "that the standards of this command have been corrupted. That the sacred trust between warriors has been broken. That a cancer of bullying, abuse, and dereliction of duty has taken root here. Today, we are going to cut it out." He looked directly at Chief Slade. "Chief Petty Officer Slade, you are being relieved of your duties, pending a full JAG investigation. You will be escorted to the brig." Two NCIS agents stepped forward and flanked a stunned Slade. The Admiral's gaze then fell upon Gunner. "Trainee Harding, you will also be placed under arrest." Gunner looked like he had been poleaxed. On what charge, sir?" he stammered. The Admiral's expression was terrifying. "For conduct unbecoming of a United States Navy sailor, for assault, and for disgracing the uniform my father and your father wore with honor." The entire investigation was a swift, brutal, and efficient machine. Petty Officer Evans, seeing his moment, came forward immediately and told the investigators everything he knew about the cover-up of Jake's collapse. Patch, seeing the tide had turned, presented the unedited footage from his camera. Hours later, Jake was escorted into a small, sterile office. His father sat behind a metal desk, a mountain of files in front of him. He wasn't his father, he was the Admiral. "Trainee Riley," he said, his voice formal, devoid of emotion. "Report." Admiral Jake began, his voice cracking. "Dad, Here, you will address me as Admiral." Marcus Riley cut him off, his tone sharp. "I am not your father right now. I am your commanding officer, conducting an investigation. You will give me a full, factual account of everything that has transpired since your arrival in Coronado. Leave nothing out." Jake's heart shattered. He had imagined this moment, a dramatic rescue. He had imagined his father arriving, a hero, a savior. But the man in front of him was a stranger, an inquisitor. There was no embrace, no comfort, just the cold, hard weight of duty. Jake realized with a sickening certainty that he hadn't been saved. He had just been moved to the center of a much larger, much more terrifying storm. And the man commanding it was his own father. For the next 48 hours, the training base at Coronado was turned inside out. The JAG and NCIS investigators worked with ruthless efficiency. Every trainee was interviewed separately. Every instructor was interrogated. The wall of silence and fear that Chief Slade and Gunner had built crumbled under the immense pressure of a full-blown command investigation, led by the Admiral himself. On the third day, Vice Admiral Riley ordered every member of the training class and cadre to assemble in the base's large auditorium. A massive projection screen hung behind the stage. The air was thick with a tension so heavy it felt like you could taste it. Admiral Riley walked to the podium, his face grim. He didn't speak for a long moment, his piercing gaze sweeping across the room, making every man feel as though he were being personally judged. "For 70 years, he began, his voice a low, powerful rumble, this ground has been a sacred place. It is where boys are forged into the most elite fighting men the world has ever known. That forging process is built on pain, on suffering, on pushing men to their absolute limits. But it is also built on something more important, a foundation of honor, courage, and commitment. It is built on the unbreakable bond between teammates. He paused, letting the words sink in. That foundation has been cracked. The bond has been broken. He nodded to a technician in the back. Roll the footage. The screen lit up. It was Patch's video. The auditorium was silent as they watched the grainy footage of the surf torture evolution. They saw Gunner's face, contorted with malice. They saw him force Jake's head beneath the waves, again and again. They saw Jake struggle. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Seeing it laid bare like this, on a giant screen, stripped of all ambiguity, was sickening. This, the Admiral said, his voice rising with controlled fury, is not training. This is not making a man harder. This is assault. This is attempted murder disguised as an evolution. This is cowardice. He then projected a series of documents onto the screen, medical reports. Chief Slade's falsified after-action reports describing Jake's collapse as quitting. The official log entry dismissing Jake's self-inflicted wound as attention-seeking behavior. For his crimes, the Admiral declared, Trainee Harding is being dishonorably discharged from the United States Navy and will face civilian charges for assault. He then turned his attention to the instructors. For willfully endangering a trainee, for falsifying official reports, and for fostering a command climate of abuse and corruption. Chief Petty Officer Slade is stripped of his rank and will face court-martial. He has disgraced the chief's anchor he wears. From the back of the auditorium, NCIS agents escorted a handcuffed and shackled Slade and Gunner out of the room. Their careers, their lives as they knew them, were over. Let me be clear to every man in this room, the Admiral said, his eyes burning with intensity. The SEAL teams are a brotherhood, not a gang. We weed out the weak, yes, but we do not prey on them. We do not torture our own. True strength is not the ability to dominate the man next to you. It is the ability to lift him up when he is falling. Anyone who does not understand that fundamental truth does not deserve to wear the trident. The speech was over. The room was silent, the weight of the Admiral's words pressing down on them all. Justice had been delivered, swiftly and brutally. Then, the Admiral did something no one expected. Trainee Riley, front and center. Jake, his heart pounding, walked from the ranks and stood at attention before the entire class. He expected to be dismissed, to be sent home now that the problem was resolved. His father walked down from the stage and stood directly in front of him. For a moment, Jake saw a flicker of the man he knew, a hint of fatherly pride mixed with sorrow. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the stoic mask of the Admiral. Your father's identity afforded you no special protection here, the Admiral said, his voice just loud enough for the front rows to hear. In fact, it made you a target. You endured a campaign of abuse that would have broken most men. You were failed by your fellow trainees, and you were failed by your leadership. He paused. The investigation is over. The guilty have been punished. He looked Jake directly in the eye. But your training is not. The bell is still there. If you want to leave, no one will blame you. But if you want to stay, you will earn your place like every other man. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You will be tested to your limit. Do you understand? Yes, Admiral, Jake said, his voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. Good. Admiral Riley took a step back and addressed the class one last time. This class will now be led by a new cadre of instructors. Your training resumes in 1 hour. Don't be late. With that, he turned and strode out of the auditorium, leaving behind a command that had been shattered and reborn in the span of 3 days. Jake stood alone at the front of the room, the eyes of every man on him. He wasn't the senator's son anymore. He wasn't the victim. He was just a trainee again. But this time, the fight would be a fair one. He took a deep breath. The healing could finally begin. The months that followed the investigation were a different kind of crucible. The new instructor cadre, handpicked by the Admiral, was brutally difficult but scrupulously fair. The training was just as hard, the conditions just as miserable, but the toxic culture of personal vendettas was gone. Performance was all that mattered. Jake thrived. Freed from the constant torment, he was able to focus all his energy on the tasks at hand. He excelled in the water, showed an unexpected aptitude for demolitions, and became a quiet leader within his boat crew. He and Patch, their bond forged in trauma and now solidified in shared purpose, were inseparable. They pushed each other, supported each other, and slowly, the ghost of the boathouse began to fade. The man once called Senator was now just Riley. He earned the respect of his classmates not because of who his father was, but because of what he did. He was the first one in the water and the last one out. He shared his rations, helped the struggling, and never, ever complained. He was becoming a SEAL. Finally, the day arrived. Graduation. On the same grinder where he had been humiliated and broken, Jake stood tall with the handful of men less than 20 from the original 95 WO had survived the course. They were battered, scarred, but they were not broken. They were brothers. They stood at rigid attention in their dress uniforms as a distinguished guest pinned the coveted gold trident symbol of the Navy SEAL Santo each of their chests. When it was Jake's turn, he looked up and saw his father, Vice Admiral Marcus Riley, standing before him, holding the pin. He was not in his admiral's uniform today. He was in his dress whites, but he was here as a father, a retired Master Chief's trident gleaming on his own chest. He carefully pushed the 2 pins of the trident through the fabric of Jake's uniform. His movements were precise, official. Then he leaned in close, his voice a low whisper for Jake's ears only. "You didn't have to do this, you know. You had nothing to prove to me." "I know," Jake whispered back, his throat tight with emotion. "I had to prove it to myself." His father's eyes glistened. He stepped back and saluted his son. Not as an admiral to a new graduate, but as one warrior to another. Jake returned the salute, crisp and perfect. In that single gesture, a lifetime of expectation, pressure, and misunderstanding melted away, replaced by a profound and silent respect. Later, away from the crowds, Patch clapped him on the shoulder. "You did it, man. You actually did it." "We did it," Jake corrected him, a wide, genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. That evening, Jake stood alone on the beach in Coronado, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The waves that had once been his tormentors now sounded like a peaceful applause. He touched the trident pinned to his chest. It was heavy. Heavy with the legacy of the men who came before him, and heavy with the price he had paid to earn it. He thought of Gunnar and Slade, their lives ruined by their own hatred and corruption. He felt not triumph, but a quiet sadness for the waste of it all. He had come to Bud AS seeking a challenge and had found the worst of human nature. But in that darkness, he had also found the best. He had found an unbreakable friendship in Patch, and he had found a strength within himself that he never knew existed. His story was a testament to a simple, powerful truth. You know, we all face our own version of Hell Week. We all have people who doubt us, who try to tear us down, who tell us we don't belong. It's easy to believe them. It's easy to listen to that voice that tells you to quit, to ring the bell. But Jake's journey teaches us that true strength isn't about the absence of pain or fear. It's about what you do in the face of it. It's about integrity when you're surrounded by corruption. It's about getting up one more time than you're knocked down. The most important battles we fight are not against others, but against the darkness within ourselves. Jake could have used his privilege as a shield, but instead, he chose to face the fire. And in doing so, he didn't just become a Navy SEAL, he became the man he was always meant to be. His story proves that your background doesn't define you, your choices do. The courage of one person, standing up for what is right, can change a broken system. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of perseverance and integrity, please support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, giving this video a thumbs up, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you had to find strength you didn't know you had. Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs. Thank you for watching.